This lesson introduces you to a mini flashcards or info cards project that you can create in JavaScript. Now what we want to do is remember how to write a simple JavaScript function on a web page, and then we're going to learn how to also improve the presentation of elements of a web page with tables and CSS code, so that you've then got all the skills that's necessary to create your own flashcard program. Okay, so here we are in the IDE, and you can see that so far I've created a heading, my solar system flashcards. I've created a button, which when pressed will run a function called Mercury Info, and you can see that the function Mercury Info is up here, and all it will do is produce a little window or a little alert which has the information Mercury is the smallest and innermost planet of the solar system. Let's test to see if that works, and you can see that works fine. Now what I want to do is I want to create a series of buttons, and I want them arranged appropriately. I also want these buttons to be a lot larger and perhaps to have different fonts and different colors, so that it looks like a little revision tool perhaps for a test that someone might have on the solar system. So you click different buttons and you get presented with different bits of information about different planets. So let's see if we can develop this a little bit further so that you've got some skills that you could then use to produce your own flashcard program. So let's start by creating another button, and this one I'm going to have as again type button. It's going to have the value of Venus, and I'm going to make it run a function called Venus Info. Up here I will just copy the code of the previous function and create my new function and call it Venus Info, so that the second button when pressed will run the correct function up here. And then I could have a bit of information about this. Venus is the, let's say, the second planet of the solar system. There we go. If I run that code, you can see I've got two buttons here, and if I click on Venus, the information about Venus pops up. Okay, so what I could do to begin with is create or add a little bit of CSS code to make the buttons larger, so I can start to style the buttons. Now to do that, what I need to do is make sure that each of these particular input buttons can be identified. So I'm going to add an ID to each of the buttons. So I'm going to write down ID equals, and then I'm going to call them info button, and I'm going to do exactly the same ID for the other, because I want to style them all in the same way. I want to have a global style for every button that I produce, so if they've all got the same identifier, then they can all be updated at the same time. So what I need to do is add my style tags so that I can add some CSS code, and let's put a / in this one. There we go. Now because I've given each of the buttons an ID, what I can do is I can actually use the hash symbol. I can put the name of that particular ID, and then I can start to style each of the elements that have got that particular ID. So let's start off by saying that I want the width of this particular button to be 150 pixels, and I want the height to also be 150 pixels. So now when I run the code, you can see that these buttons are now larger. Okay, they've been styled appropriately. And that's not the only style that we could do. We could add some other styles. For example, we could say that we want the font family to be Century Gothic, like so. And we could say that we want the color to be green, that's the color of the text. And perhaps we want to change the font size, so we could go font size is 20, and we could say that we want the background color, like so, to be, let's say, yellow. So now when we run the code, you can see that I've further styled these buttons. They still have the same function that's called each time the buttons are pressed, but I've styled these to make it look a little bit more appealing. Now, one issue that I would have is if I kept adding new buttons, they would just go along the page over to the right hand side, and what I want to do is I want to arrange the different buttons in a grid, and the best way to do that is by adding an HTML table. So let's start by adding our table HTML tags, and inside we need to think, okay, how many rows do we want to have in our table? So let's say that we are going to have, just start off with, we're going to have 3 rows. So what I want to do is I want to say, okay, I'm going to have one table row. I'm then going to have another table row underneath. So TR allows me to create these individual rows of the table, like so. Let's put a closing one there. And then I need to think, okay, how many cells do I want to have in each of my rows? Well, what I can do is I could perhaps have 3 cells, so I could effectively have a grid of 9, and to produce a cell we use a TD tag, like so. Close that one, and again. So I've got one row with 3 cells, I've got another row with 3 cells, and I've got another row with 3 cells. Okay, so at the moment, if I was to run the code, we wouldn't see anything, but there is the structure now for my table. So what I could do is I could get my first button and I could put that inside my first cell, like so. Let's tidy that up and let's just make them start and finish. Okay, so that's the contents of the first cell, and you can see there that Mercury is underneath the previous button because the table is code is underneath the other button up there. Let's add the second button in. Okay, so that's starting to be arranged, and then what I could do is I could add my other buttons like so. So let's now add a button for Earth, and we'll call it Earth Info. We'll run that. Now if I click on that one, nothing will happen because there is no function called Earth Info, but I could create that quite easily up here. So there's my new function, and all I'd need to do is just change the name to Earth Info, and I could say something about Earth. Earth is where we live. Let's run that code, and you can now see that if I were to click that button, you can see that we've got an alert which says Earth is where we live. So I've filled out the cells in that first row. If I was to then add another, perhaps for Mars, into the first cell of the second row, you'll see that the arrangement will be as expected. It should be underneath. So let's say Mars info here, and let's run that code. You can see that Mars is now underneath, and of course I would just need to add a new function for Mars. Mars info. Mars shares its name with a chocolate bar. What an amazing fact. Okay, so that is now working. I suppose the only other thing that we could do to further develop this code very quickly is I could add some more CSS code. I could say body, I could open up my curly brackets, and I could perhaps put in a background color. So let's go background, color, and let's choose aqua, and let's run that code. and you can see I've got now a background color for my page. So that was just a quick starter of how you can create different buttons, how you can style the buttons, how you can make each button present different information, and how you can style the page itself, maybe adding backgrounds. And I suppose I haven't done this, but you could then style the heading as well, make it centered, change the font, and so on. So have a go yourself at using the skills to create your own flashcard program. And to add detail to this task, what you could do is you could create your own information flashcard web page about a topic of your choice, making sure that you've got at least 9 buttons. It has to be informative. The buttons need to be resized, have color, and have text within, written in a font that differs from the default. And the page must have a background color, either a color or perhaps try and remind yourself how you can add an image instead to the background. And then as an extension, see if you can add more HTML, more CSS to the page to improve the presentation further, and maybe do a little bit of research online.